Hello and welcome to the podcast. Just a reminder, if you haven't subscribed, please do. It does help a lot. You can listen to us on any of your podcast players or watch us on YouTube. We have some incredible conversations coming up this year, so we'd love to have you join us. Today, I'm joined by Jag Jassel, a founder, entrepreneur and innovator who successfully exited his business at the end of 2021 and then found himself, like many other leaders, asking, what's next? That question led him into the world of fractional executive work and ultimately to founding fractionalpractice.com. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Well, hello, Jag. It's lovely to see you. It's been a long time in the making for our conversation because we met many years ago because you were one of my first business coaches when I left Telstra and I was unsure about what I was doing. And so that was around 2020, I think.
Yeah, probably before that, because I remember running that 3-day event. I think you came in a 3 or
I
5-day
did.
event.
I
We did.
came to a 3-day workshop
Yeah,
with you.
yeah. So that was 2018, 2019, around that time. Yeah, so that was a long time ago.
Long time ago. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm really excited about this conversation because I know you've got some really new ways of thinking about career and particularly career for executives who, like me, in a mature stage of life and experience, find themselves perhaps leaving the corporate world and thinking, well, what am I going to do now? But before we get into that, and I know because you've got such an entrepreneurial spirit, you've been a founder before, I wanted to just get a sense of what are the major milestones for you that have led you to this place today or right now?
All right, long story, but I'll start. Like many other people, I kind of grew up in a family where I was told to do things in a certain way. So, for example, my family and the mindset I've been given that hey, go to the university, go do your bachelor's and masters and PhDs and all that. And then follow the path and become a manager and work for a company for 20, 25, 30 years, and then just retire. That was the kind of mindset I was in. And I kind of followed the path. I did all that, been to the university, done all that, double masters and all that. But what happens is, along the way, I kind of realized is this, thing which I was taught, it kind of, I don't like that at the moment. It's just, I'm not enjoying it. It's just feeling like a rut that I'm kind of stuck. But I started doing things on the side. And like many other people, we pick up stuff on the side and start doing things. I think 2015, 2016, oh, sorry. Yeah, 2015 was the time when I showed up at one of the Tony Robbins events and at the UPW about 10, 11 years ago now. And at that time, I was sort of saying, okay, I work and I've got a good job and money is really good, but what's next? So that was a question I kind of started to ask, hey, what's next? I've done a lot of startups before that and did all that, but failed. None of them, my startups worked. Like, I've done before that, I think 13, 14 startups. None of them worked.
Wow.
But one thing Tony said in that entire event, he said a lot of stuff. Like for 3 days, he said tons of things. But a few things I picked up for me personally was, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you're trying to do something, go and find somebody who has done it and ask for help or pay them for coaching. And, then instead of trying to do it yourself, that was very different for me just because coming from this traditional background, asking for help means that, you are weak. And that hasn't been taught, like, looking at somebody else's results,
Exactly.
looking at somebody else's work called pleasurism, right? So we couldn't actually, I wasn't kind of thinking that way at all.
Mm.
So I was thinking that I had to do everything alone by myself, I'm by myself. And that was the mindset. But in this world, I kind of realized that You don't need to do everything by yourself. There's tons of people available. Go and ask for help. If they are happy to, give you for free, that's fine. But even, pay for it. At least they'll save you 15, 20, 30 years of hard work. So that was a big learning curve. So came back and started working with, you know, started IT company, which did well. Then we started a marketing agency, which did really well for 5, 6 years. I didn't do anything by myself. I actually gone and hired people, gone and worked with people like Frank Kern, who was one of my early mentors. And yeah, so I think exited that agency after 5, 6 years. That's where we met when I
Yes.
was running the marketing agency. And yeah, after that, I started thinking, what I'm going to do next, basically, right? So, and then started working 1 day here, 2 days there, 3 days there. Kind of didn't know what I was going to do. For a few years, I kind of, just gone here and there. Nothing, kind of knew the path. The only reason I worked because I thought, okay, I've done that. Company's been successful, but what's next for me? I didn't actually know what's next for me. So I kind of, just worked. I said part-time consulting for many years, and just recently, about a couple of years ago, I kind of now developed in a different model, which I'm going to talk about, right? So, yeah.
Before we go there, I wanted to just explore that feeling because I know other people have that feeling. What was it like for you to be a little bit lost during that time? I mean, you didn't use the word lost. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No,
But what was
yeah.
that feeling like where you sort of thinking, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. you're picking up bits and pieces, but you're still trying to decide on what's next.
Yeah, look, I think it's one of those feelings where you kind of feel that, hey, nothing is working for you. But I'm a big believer, and for years and years, and took me years to practice this. It doesn't come easy, that the art of surrendering, right? And doing what you kind of love doing. So along the way, teaching's been one of my passions. So I ran, teaching classes, after hours, coaching, my own things, just so that I help people, right? So that was something which I kept doing, just so that I have something happening on the side to help me, keeping that spark alive. But I kind of left in and surrendered. Like I was like, okay, whatever comes, I'm just going to do it. Doesn't matter, what it is. And I'm not going to say no to things which come my way. And that was the kind of path I chose, let it some time. And I reckon most of us who work for somebody else for many, many, many years, and you get paid to solve problems,
Yes.
what happens is we try to solve everything in our own lives, right? And I feel that it's completely the opposite, that solving or figuring it out or trying to work it out kind of doesn't work. Like sometimes you just have to say, hey, I don't know, whoever you believe in, look up and say, hey,
Yeah.
you know better than us, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about what happened to shift you out of that into this new venture, which we'll talk about very soon.
Yeah, and nothing. I think is there wasn't any sort of point I would say, hey, shift. I was talking to somebody, in the U.S. couple of years ago, and just like any kind of gathering, we kind of sit together, people are talking, and I said, hey, I just do consulting, and because that's the language I used, and I do consulting, a couple of days there, 5 days there, like there wasn't any fixed thing.
Yeah.
Some people call it contracting, some people call it consulting. People have their own terminologies. So I did the same thing, but the guy I was talking to, he said, no. I think you're using a fractional model. And I was like, what is this fractional model? And he said, fractional is you just, basically work with, instead of working with one customer, you work with 5 or 6. And that's what you're doing. I said, yeah, pretty much. He said, yeah, that's model is a fractional model instead of consulting. Consulting is, a bit different. And then you work as a fractional, you're running a fractional work rather than consulting. And that was a big change for me, just to kind of wrap my head around how does that work. Then for last couple of years, I kind of gone deep into that work and I started to study it, understand it. I've been doing it, and then started working with other people and helping them as well.
So tell me a little bit more about the definition of fractional work. 'Cause you said it's different to consulting. How is it different?
All right. So I think the biggest thing people need to understand is consulting is, when we say consulting, we're kind of saying I'm going to work 2 hours, you just get paid for 2 hours or 5 hours or a day worth of work, right? You're basically charging for your time spent. You're working as a labor. That's it, right? There is no other model around it. There is no path to get to the next level. Like, if somebody else comes in, you get kicked out of that business, you still kind of go back. So there is nothing to look forward to. When I say fractional model or fractional practice, there is a pathway available, right? So everybody kind of starts at one pathway called operator. We all are operator. We work with somebody and we kind of have stages where we go and do the work. And then get to the next stage, which is advisory stage, where you kind of only working there and you charge based on providing the advisory. So pricing structure within a fractional practice is very different than charging per hour, right?
Yes.
So if in a nutshell, what I find going to say, people still do similar things in consulting, but what we're doing is we're defining the line and making people understand it, that instead of just selling your time, there is a different pathway available, that you develop your own intellectual property instead of just going and working based on half a day, one day. There is a path available where you work on a defined scope and an outcome based, engaged consulting kind of manner. So, yeah.
Can you give me an example, perhaps with a role in mind,
Yeah.
that might
So,
bring it to life?
yeah. Look, it doesn't apply to if you're just getting started at workplace, right? So all those graduates, people thinking, it doesn't apply to them. It applies to those people who have worked at a senior executive level.
Yeah.
Right. So you have been, CMO, CFO, sales director, chief revenue officer, all that level. If you worked in that sort of industry, that sort of level in any organization, that is where you can actually start a fractional practice. What it means is instead of just working for one customer, you work for 4 or 5 or 6 customers. You can start as an operator, meaning that you do the delivery work.
Yes.
And then what you can do is you can become an advisor and you can hire the operators to actually do the work. So many people do it differently. Like I've got CTO I work with, he loves as an operator.
Right.
Like he doesn't
getting his
want
hands
to,
dirty in the work.
that's
Yeah.
it. He doesn't want to run it like a practice. He doesn't want to have, operators working with him. So he's happy with that model. The only thing he had to do is just come up with defined scope and get paid for the outcome, not by an hour
Not
of
the
day.
hours.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So what we do is we kind of work with creating your own intellectual property so that you can deliver on defined outcomes.
Right. Which is because anytime you're on a timesheet or a time for hours worked, or you're very limited. So this model
Yeah.
sounds more expansive. Yeah.
And also, I'll give you a simple example, right? It's the very basic example when a lot of people don't understand it. Is, when you are in working for an organization, you work there in a full time, the authority is implied, meaning that there is an org structure available, that you are working as some sort of executive level.
Yes.
There is a structure and everybody kind of know that structure is there, right? And the hardest part is, and people don't understand it, when you come from an external, you come from an outside, and you start your own fractional or consulting or whatever you want to call it in the beginning, you start that structure is not there. You need to have very clearly stating some of the things which people, when you work full time, it's already been implied. So you have to be deliberate about certain things when you're starting something like this. So that's just a simple example that authority doesn't come if you just run it as a consulting work or as a fractional work. It has to be explicitly described and told and gone through it with the organization and CEOs, rather than, when you work full time, it's already part of your org structure.
Yeah. So, and I imagine there are other important accountability steps in that as well. So it's authority, accountability, as well as then responsibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the main thing is taking the ownership of that very specific part of the business, that you are responsible for it. Going fractional doesn't mean that, responsibility disappears. No. I think we say that you're still an executive, you're still responsible for that part of, that's very tiny, probably part of the business. You are responsible. It doesn't actually matter who does the delivery, right? But you need to take that responsibility.
And Jag, in your experience really talking to people who are shifting to this mode, What's the benefit for the organisation? Why would they just not hire you on a
As full.
time per hour
Yeah.
basis again? What is the benefit for them?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest thing at the moment, what I'm seeing is first, the benefit of not just hiring a full time, right? Why not just hire a full time?
Mm,
It takes a bit of time at the moment, right? So if you want to hire an exec, it's not just, you go out into the market, somebody's going to be there tomorrow, right? It takes a long time to hire it. The other one is what I'm seeing right now is a role phrase that you just can't hire anybody full time. Right, it's just getting it harder and
mm,
harder to hire somebody full time, and then it comes to the pay structure. Right, it's just very different. What's the benefit for, or that there is a what I've seen is kind of businesses between, say, 2 million to 50 mil,
mm-hmm.
which they supplies where they can't afford is a wrong word, where they would rather spend that money somewhere else rather than just hiring somebody full time,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
So it's not just one role. You can have many fractional execs in your leadership
Mm,
team
mm.
rather than just like, think of that as if you're just starting out and your revenue is about 5 to 7 mil, instead of spending the entire budget on that one CMO or CFO, you can have all that fractional team put together, right?
Yes.
One of the things which I'm currently doing, and it's kind of, I would say, taking 20 to 30% of my time, is working with the CEOs and founders and the boards and helping them understand how to put this model together
I
in their
can
business.
imagine because it's quite different.
It's very different. And I think because it's very new in this country,
Mm,
especially with us in Australia, right? It's very good in the UK because most of the people I work with are in the UK and the US.
mm.
And their model is being developed really well. But I think what I'm seeing locally, it's not that level yet. So that's why my job is, and I think a few other people, we try to educate people and say, hey, this is another model available for you to try it, rather than just thinking, hey, you can just hire a full time or a contractor.
Yeah. I would imagine too that there's a benefit for organisations in consistency of service around that need without the on costs or overhead that comes with bringing on an executive full time. Is that right? Am I making an assumption there?
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. Look, I think there is a lot of hidden benefits, which are kind of deep, and every organization is different. We kind of start with the first, start talking about the availability, that you can get somebody onboarded very quickly. The second one
Mm,
is, the financial benefits. You would rather spend that somewhere else, and then you can have that. And also, it's not that you have to have that team for the next 20 years. You got to understand that every business has got levels and steps to get to the next level,
yeah.
right? So this is one of those messy middles, and this is a solution for that
For
middle
that
part.
time,
Yeah,
exactly.
for that time. So you can have the time for 5 years or 6 years. Once you get to the next level and have people you can hire full time, yeah, that's the
You
way to
like
do
because
it
the
as well.
growth,
Yeah,
hopefully you've experienced growth and it
that's
justifies that.
right. Yeah, that's right.
And so there is always like to think about how AI and automation affects any of these future workforce models that we're talking about. How does it affect this area that you're like executive fractional work that you're talking about?
Look, it makes it easy, to be honest. It just makes it so easy for us just now, because in the past, we had to hire a virtual assistant to do most of the work,
Mm.
right? The one which is now done by AI. So I reckon it's really useful. It's really helpful. Rather than hiring employees, or virtual assistants, this kind of helps having an AI or trained AI to actually do that for you. Not saying that virtual assistants not required,
Yeah,
but I think if you're running a fractional work, early stages when you're trying to figure out how things work, AI just having that for yourself, it helps a lot,
mm,
right? So what
mm,
we're
mm.
doing, I'll give you an example of
Yeah,
this. Early stages, when your practice is not developed that much and you only have, a couple of clients, we have developed an AI for the people who we work with. So instead of, just asking question and kind of struggling that, you can ask that question AI, like, AI, get a response back. So that
right.
kind of thing, it helps. But I think overall, And this is the overall job market. I think it's going to get worse and worse. Like I'm just talking about overall job market because of AI. I feel that's a big change coming, and I think a lot of people are not prepared for it.
I do agree with you, Jag. I think that there's a inertia in a lot of executive teams at the moment just because they're so unsure about the future. It doesn't mean that there won't be jobs in the future, but it's that we're experiencing that inertia. And this model is one of the ways in which executives can start thinking about things differently.
Yeah, and I think it's good to have that option available. If I said traditionally, I only knew a couple of options, right? Either you work for somebody else
Yeah,
or either you start a business, right? You kind of have this, there is nothing in the middle. So, what we're doing is saying, hey, there is a fractional practice model available in the
yeah,
middle where you don't need to create a big business, right? It's not creating that, I don't know. $300 million worth of business with revenue. It's a simple practice where you work with 4 or 5 clients and have the good amount of revenue coming in. You can scale that and have many
yeah.
operators working inside, but it's up to you, right? You
Mm,
decide which way you want to go. But
mm,
many people I've noticed, they're happy with 4 or 5 clients, and you know, and
yeah,
that some advisory work, 30-40% advisory, and a few of them operators, that they're good.
exactly. Now you've founded fractionalpractice.com. Tell me about that.
This was very interesting. After I had a chat with some folks at the US, the intention was, hey, how do I make it better? Like, how do I make it better from my side? Kind of started putting things together. It took me about a year to put all the standards together. So the intention behind fractionalpractice.com is create a standards around fractional work. Right? So not just going out and doing the work, you want to have certain standards how to operate it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it applies on both sides. When an organization hire an executive who work as a fractional exec, they understand what that person is going to bring, because everybody at the moment, if you look at it, and most people, they run the way they think it's right. So there is no common standard available. So
Mm-hmm.
think of that as like, about, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, the way the project management standards were in place, right? There was nothing. Everybody kind of managed their project the way they thought was right. And then the PMI came in and then they, pretty much put the standards together.
Exactly.
So what we try to do is pretty much the same way. Try to put the standards around it, make sure that you follow this standard, and then you can have a legit running fractional practice, which applies to both sides. The organization is happy, and the executive is happy as well because they're running that compliant.
Yeah, exactly. And so fractionalpractice.com is where, for example, people who are trying to move into this practice space can get information and can build capability around applying
That's
these
right. Yeah. So
standards as well.
we do two things. And one is we manage the standards. That's the main thing. That's our holy grail for everything, right? This is a standard we follow. And then we have to, if you're already running a practice, like most of the CFOs and CMOs, they have a good practice going on. What we do is we just do the audit and make sure that aligns with the standard. What happens is when you have that compliant standard, you can go to the organization and say, hey, we have been compliant, right? We've been audited. We're not just running some random stuff. We've been
Yes.
audited by the external party, and this is how my practice is running, right? So that,
Let me ask you
yeah,
this question about, and I like the idea of standards, particularly when something is new and novel, because it lends credibility but also trust. Because I can imagine a lot of boards, a lot of executive teams, CEOs are thinking, well, they're just used to a consulting model, for example. They think of it as overly expensive. Sometimes you get consulting that doesn't quite fit with the organization, so it doesn't get embedded in the organization. Whereas this is more about having an ongoing fractional service in a way that is outcome based, that then fits with the organization. And so I really like that idea. Tell me more about owning those outcomes though, because I think that's also the differentiator here that we're talking about.
yeah, I'll give you a run it exactly. So this is what I do. This is, yes, I run the fractionalpractice.com as a standard, and we do the audits and formations. But I run my own practice, and I've been doing it for a while. So it's a sales leadership practice. Uh, One of the outcomes which I own, and it's all about revenue for me. right? So people hire people like myself just to own the revenue. Like, they want to increase the revenue by 20, 30, 40%. My job is to make sure that I own that outcome. Not just saying to somebody, hey, I just manage your sales team, I manage it. Most people, when I started, right, so I kind of follow the same path, because when you work for a company for a full time, you kind of get into that management mode. And we did that, right? I did the same thing, that I became sort of manager of something. I kind of forgot to own the outcomes. So I had to come out of that. And I think that was a big change for me personally.
Yeah.
That not just talk about, not just talk about that these are the way people need to run it. Basically have that responsibility, take the ownership of that part of the business. So my job is to make sure the team is trained. I do coaching with all the salespeople.
Yeah.
I review their calls. I review their demos. That's my job as part of that, right? So CEO doesn't need to know that how I do it, but that's my part of the job, that I take the responsibility. I take the responsibility of the pipeline. I make sure I speak to the marketing team. I make sure the leads are coming through. That is my role,
Right.
and I take the responsibility. I do that in 5 hours, or I may do that in 1 hour, but that's my job, right? So if I think of as a traditional terms that I'm only going to do in 5 hours because I'm going to get paid for that much, that kind of doesn't work in that model, just because I'm responsible, right? Doesn't matter how long. I may pick up a phone and call somebody at 7 p.m. or just, I know it's, some people think it's late, but I'm responsible, right? Because
when
I
you
own
it.
Right. So I don't look at the clock. I make sure I do the work. Like, it doesn't matter what time it is, doesn't matter what we do. Yesterday I was reviewing somebody's about 35-minute demo and making notes to make sure that we have a standard template available within the company. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a standard template for playbook for all the salespeople, right, based on my reviews. So it takes a bit of time. So just owning and that's the responsibility I own. And I know many of other execs like CMOs, CFOs, they do the same thing in their part as well. And that's the education which I'm trying to do that with the CEOs and board members, that, hey, there is a path available. You don't need to worry about ours. You make sure that you give it to somebody, this part of the business, and they are responsible for it. They'll run with it and they'll make sure everything is done. So that's the education part of it.
Because I think in the past we've thought about, whenever I've heard about fractional staff or even fractional consulting, that immersive experience is definitely there. So 2 or 3 or 4 clients, but they only get a day of my time or half a day of my time.
Yes.
And sometimes, and then I might sign up to some key result areas, but they're only paying me for half a day, so they're not going to get that. I believe really for future workforce, any time that you're tracking hours, the incentives are wrong, because
That's right.
If you incentivize people properly, you do not have to worry about hours. It's actually an input. I mean, you can track them if you want to. You can do activity-based costing if you want to, but you should be really focusing on outcomes.
Yeah, and especially at our level, like, to be honest, it's at this level that if you're still tracking hours, it's embarrassing. Like, you're telling your CMO that you have done 5 hours, and that person is going to say, what are you talking about?
Exactly.
It's even embarrassing to even at this level, right? Exec team are responsible. They own the outcome. They manage the outcome. And it's not about hours at all. And I think that's why I'm really deliberate about the words we use. Just because if you say fractional work, and a lot of people run fractional work, they do it as a consulting way. Means that they invoice people for 4 hours, they invoice people for a day. That's a fractional work, and they just happy with. What we say is as a fractional practice. So there is a difference between fractional work and a fractional practice. Practice run in a very different way. And we want people to run it as a practice and have a standards in place, not just like selling yourself as a labor.
Yeah. Actually, I should have asked you earlier too, because with standards comes an idea that there is some benchmark or some best practice so far. Yeah. So So how did you develop the standards? Because I think that's really important for people to know.
Look, I think it took a bit of time to do this, to be honest. It wasn't sort of straight away it happened. Worked with a lot of people who are in the industry and they've been working for a while. What we said in the standard is if you want to run a successful fractional practice, there are sort of 9 controls. We say controls, and when we review it, we review those controls. Like, your positioning control, meaning that
Right.
how do you position yourself in the market? We review that. Your offer control, how do your offer is in the market? What are your, scope? What are the deliverables? What are the activities look like? That's your offer. And how do you price your offer? And similar to the deal structure, how do you actually convert people? So these are the controls.
Right.
When we do the audit and we do the benchmark and we say, hey, these are the minimum things we need. And a lot of people, when you are running it for a while, you kind of do what you think is right without any standards in place. And what we're saying to people is don't just run it like a job or, or a consulting. Don't become an employee. Run it like a practice and have these controls in place. And when you have these 9 controls in place, you can measure it against it and you can say, hey, these controls is missing, then I can come and install this control for you, right? That kind of way. Right. Yeah. So I think it's standards. The best way to figure out if you're running a legit practice is to do an audit. We do the audit. We ask for things. Hey, these are things available. And then we kind of do a tick in the box kind of thing.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what's next, Jag, in terms of fractional practice? What's your dream going forward?
I think, look, we've been working behind the scene for a while now, and I think the next dream is to take it to the market now, let people understand it, become more visible, educate both sides, and more and more people need to know this and run it like a legit and governed practice, not just. And I think my job is to educate more people, both sides, organization as well as the people who want to run it as a fractional practice.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know you're a great communicator, so I wish you well with that. I'm sure that we're going to hear more about this, and perhaps we can do another recap maybe in the 6-month or 9-month mark and see how you're going. So happy to do that again, because I think this is it's a novel, interesting, exciting way for people to think about their own career, but also for organizations to think about how they're going to structure the future workforce. I think there's some innovation there that bodes really well with that future workforce, that question that many people are thinking about. So I love that. I love that you're bringing systems together and offering something for individuals too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Jag. I really appreciate it. How can people find you? And we'll put some links as well.
Absolutely. I think the best way to go and check it out, fractionalpractice.com, and you find pretty much everything there. And look at me or on LinkedIn, find me there and connect.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jag.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.